evening, and welcome to the second episode of Voices, a year-long archival art initiative curated by Serendip Art and the Hashtag Collective, of which I'm a founder member, to investigate the creative present through conversations between artists and arts writers. The term conversations brings to mind a fabulous book I recently read called The Story of a Brief Marriage. Author Anuk Arutprasasam talks of how conversation is an innate condition of being human, likening it to an invisible filament shot into the air as a stream of sound, which enters the bodies of other people through their ears. From those humans, it goes to others, and from them yet more. So that in the end, to quote him, communities are nothing more than humans held together in this way, in large, intricate, imperceptible webs whose function is to connect each individual to every other. Voices certainly grew out of conversations between all of us, Ravi, Namrata, Sarah, myself, Abin, Biju. We felt it was necessary to present and archive voices as a critical historical snapshot of these uncertain COVID-inflected times. We felt it was important to curate a series such as this, inviting artists to share their journeys within context set by the arts writers in conversation with them. A brief word about the Hashtag Collective, which was formed by Biju Kuriakose, Abin Chaudhary, Sarah Biju, and myself. We believe very strongly in the power and necessity of conversations and collaboration, and in building a sense of community within the creative world. We have strong individual practices, but come together from time to time to explore multidisciplinary artworks in site-specific installations, to create greater engagements for the public with art and the issues of our times. In our wonderful and generous collaborator, Ravi Kavle, we found someone with the same vision, coupled with a deep passion for the arts. Former industrialist Ravi Kavle is an art collector and supporter of the arts based in Bangalore, who set up Serendip Art as a gallery by appointment to showcase contemporary artworks. He has sponsored the Ananya Dishya program that is helmed by eminent artist S.G. Vasudev and is a curator with the Alliance Française de Bangalore for the Young Talents program. Before I ask Ravi to introduce our wonderful speakers tonight, a quick word about tonight's program. We invite you to please post your questions and whom they are directed to in the chat box, both in Zoom and YouTube, or you can even message me as many of you did the last time. After the main session between Shivani and Nalini, we will try and answer as many as we can. Over to you now, Ravi, to do the introductions.
Good evening, folks, and welcome to this August gathering, I must say. We're talking about Nalini Malaviya. She is a Bangalore-based art consultant, curator, and writer. And in addition to curating contemporary art exhibitions, she offers curatorial and advisory services to individuals and corporates, facilitating art acquisitions. She has been writing for the media since 2003 and has been an art columnist for leading newspapers. Nalini is also founder publisher of the Art Scene India, which started out as a blog and today is an important resource site and digital archive. Nalini is a member advisory committee, National Gallery of Modern Art, Bangalore, and is also the state president of WIKI, which is the Karnataka Arts Leadership Council. Talking about Shivani, she is a New Delhi-based visual artist with a degree in fine arts from New Delhi and a postgraduate certificate from the Wimbledon School of Art, London, UK. And her art practice has been developing into an exploration of issues related to gender and the human condition, drawing a connection between society, its conditioning, and responses and acts that emerge from these. She is invested in a variety of media, and her work conjures up an image of threads, needlework, scissors, all kinds of things to do with needlework and as such, from the works that I have seen. And as she says, her work is developed from small, intimate, and intricate paintings to large 3D sculptural installations in wood, terracotta, fiberglass, wire, and thread. So I think now I hand it over to Nalini and Shivani.
Thank you, Ravi. Thank you for that introduction. Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be a part of the Voices platform, which Parvati has talked about. And thank you to the hashtag collective as well for giving us the opportunity today to be able to talk and have a conversation with Shivani. As Ravi mentioned, Shivani has extensively used fiber and thread along with various other materials in her paintings, sculptures, and installations. And I've been seeing Shivani's works for almost 10 years now. I think it was at the India Art Fair that I first spotted her work and made a note of it. So since then, especially in the last 5 years, we've worked together on several projects, and it's been a special journey to see the intimate detailing and imagery on one hand, and the expansive scale and volume on the other in her works. So let's just start right away. And Shivani, so I'm going to ask you a few questions just to lead the conversation, and then we can chit chat along the way. So would you like to share how you began using thread as a material in your practice, and what implications it has for you from both a personal and a social perspective?
Hello, everyone. And I'd like to thank, first of all, I'd like to thank Ravi Kavale, Serendip Art, Parvati, Saira, and the hashtag collective for inviting me here. And thank you so much, Nalini, for that lovely introduction that you gave. I'll begin by answering your question. So, well, I've been working with the threads for a long time now, and I'd like to take you back to where it actually originated. So I had been, I'll take you back to a very, fond memory from my childhood. So growing up in New Delhi, I must be 6 or 7 years old, and it was one of our favorite pastimes in the afternoon to, for all the women in the house, my mother and my grandmother and my aunts, to sit around together, and they would be either knitting or crocheting, and my grandmother would be sitting on her sewing machine and creating these very beautiful things for the house and for the family, for the children in the house. And I was always hovering around them. I was very fascinated by what they were doing, what they were creating. And another thing that was always, the whole place had bags of thread and bags of wool, which I was always very fascinated by. So one very common sight in our household was these half-done knittings just kept on side tables or on the bed or on the shelves. And these half-done embroideries or crochet or these threads just lying around. So my engagement with threads has been since childhood. I used to look at them. I was very fascinated by them. And what I was also fascinated by was my mother and my grandmother's, engagement with them. And this whole endearing thing that they were always creating something for the house and for the family. So threads began coming into my work in 2003, 2004, when I was in Wimbledon in London, and I was doing these mixed media works with where I was collaging threads. And since then, I began working with threads, and I began painting in 2007, and I'd like to now screen share and show you a couple of images.
Yeah.
So threads began appearing in my work in, say, 2007, 2008. This is a work done in 2008, and so I realized I could paint thread, and so these works were coming. I think I was reliving my childhood memories. Also, along with taking care of my very little daughter, she was very small then, must be just 1 or 2. So I think I was reliving part of my childhood through her. So these images began, so threads began coming. And for me, threads basically meant the social fiber in some works, which gets complicated and which talks about a little conflict. It entangles these everyday objects in them, and engulfs them engulfs these objects in them. So and also threads do draw a reference to blood because of the color and these swirling patterns that it is making. It does draw reference to blood vessels and blood in general. So at that time, I was in 2007, 2008, I was creating these paintings.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. I think when Shivani was talking about that, she grew up with these childhood memories, and everybody was, there was sewing, crocheting, knitting, and the thread was everywhere. And then also the references to the fact that, it's the body, how you look at it. And I think later on we'll be able to see that part also, how the self and the body then comes into her works. Okay, so we have the image now.
These paintings, and they were very small in size. So coming from this very sort of intimate space, they were always small and they were very intricate. And this is how the works began happening. So I continued to paint for a couple of years like this. And
so, like you said, there has been,
yes.
These were very small and intimate kind of works that you were doing. And then you moved on to large three-dimensional and sculptural installations, which were in various materials, like Ravi had also mentioned that it was in wood and fiberglass and terracotta. You've used a lot of wire, and also you've combined thread along with all of these. So what would be interesting to know is that how does then scale and material, how has it affected your practice? If you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, so I'd really like to take, actually this image is kind of very important because my first sculptural installation was actually a translation of this image. I'll take you to it. So see, when it is moving now. I hope it continues to move. Yeah. So this image. So the previous image is the work that I did around 2010, and I actually translated that image into a sculptural installation. Also because I began to feel that a lot of elements that I was using and a lot of things that I was using had more potential than what I was doing with them then. So I needed needed to probably grow out of my canvas, needed to explore these images or these elements a lot more. So I actually decided to scale. Coming from these very tiny, small canvases, I wanted to probably play with scale just to see what happens. Also wanted to push myself, and I think painting, from painting to sculpture was a little shift and a leap in, because I'm basically trained as a painter. So I sort of just shifted. It was a little difficult and challenging then, this kind of shift. But here I kind of, these knitting needles are 6 feet long, and I did this knitting, and this was actually a translation of the previous work. I just translated it into a different material. So the interesting part is, as soon as I did that, as soon as I saw it in a different space and scale and material, it began changing the meaning of the work, in the sense that this work no longer, though it represented everything that I was talking about, this warmth and love and care that comes, that I had been talking about, it does represent that. Yet these knitting needles are dysfunctional. They don't knit anything. So it represents something that it doesn't perform. So this kind of paradox began appearing, and I was quite interested in actually exploring this, and that kind of took me to my next work. So I wanted to sort of talk about this work. So I actually began using this change of scale and space and material. I began taking it a lot more seriously and began creating works. So this is a small thread reel that we find around in our house. It's something that repairs fabrics and repairs torn fabrics and puts buttons into our shirts. So I scaled it as big as 7.5 feet. And as soon as I scaled it big, I realized that it is, though it represents repair, but actually it repairs nothing. It's something that cannot repair anything, essentially, because because of the scale, it doesn't repair anything. Can we move on to the next slide?
Sure.
So yes, so from here I was actually, enlarging all the objects and all the elements I'd been using in my painting, like this. So this is again a 6.5 feet long work. It's in fiberglass, and this is again a dysfunctional object that I had done. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. So yeah, this brings us to this work. It's part of a very interesting project that I was invited for. So this carpet industry called Raj Overseas from Panipat had opened its doors to a few artists to actually draw inspiration from their techniques, their weaving, and their and the things that were in their factory. And this is a work, so it was, I felt extremely, fascinated by what was going on, because there were so many things that were in there, so many looms and so many other interesting weaving techniques that they were using, in embroidery techniques. So this is something which carries the thread from one end to the other in a loom. And I enlarged it to a 5 feet big size, and this is the work. The work is called a shuttle, and it is done in wood. So can we move on to the next slide?
So actually, I just wanted to add that, in this work, what you can see in the background, that is embroidery on the canvas.
Yes, it is. So it was, some works I did using the techniques that were going on in their factory and sort of translating them in other mediums. So this is a canvas where I sort of used the embroidery that was done there.
The next one, please. I'm glad to see questions have started to come in, and perhaps we could take them a little later on. Parvati, if you could make a note of it, or we should be able to spot them in the chat box. That's fine.
I'll put the questions together and we'll go through as many of them.
Perfect. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Shivani.
So,
yes.
Yeah. So this work is again an enlarged pair of scissors, which actually doesn't cut anything, and it is enwrapped with the threads itself. So by this time, I had begun understanding that I am essentially making these enlarged dysfunctional objects. And this whole idea of dysfunctional began, I began sort of working on it more actively. Can we move on to the next image? Yes, it is working. Let me just take it ahead from here. Yes, so this brings us to this work called I Can't Hold Anything Anymore. And again, it's a 6.5 feet big pair of tongs, kitchen tongs, really. And by this time, I began feeling that all these objects that I enlarged have begun almost saying that they've given up their function. They don't want to be who they are. They don't want to do their defined function. They don't want to perform their defined function. So
yeah.
Yes.
So it's very interesting to see, how you've been able to step outside personal and social limits and limitations to be able to highlight notions of gender, identity, politics of class, and acts of protest, because some of these works, they are silent acts of violence that, subverted in a sense. So that's also there. Then you also played with the idea of distortion and functionality, as we saw in these. But apart from these works, I think you've also done where you've altered the form. And that has been a significant way in which you've impacted the functional aspects of the object or tool. Would you like to talk a little bit about that? Perhaps we could see those images then.
Yes, I think I'll take you to the image straight and probably then we can talk about it.
Yes,
So,
this is what I was talking
the image
about.
comes around. Yes.
Yes, how
So,
the form is impacted.
Yes. So making these enlarged forms, I had heard this very interesting Japanese proverb which said that uh, any nail that sticks out needs to be hammered down. So I would always wonder, this sort of proverb stayed with me, and I would always wonder about this hammer. Who is this hammer? What does it do? What is it about? And basically the proverb means that any defiance will be met with suppression. So any rebellion will be suppressed. So I would always wonder about this this hammer which pushes everything down. And so I would wonder what this hammer is about. What is this hammer really is? What is this hammer talking about? So I began thinking, and is it our cultural, say, structures, the rules that we follow, the policies that are put on us, and and so all that. And then I would look around myself and see that everything around us is bent and twisted according to convenience and greed. So that is where this work comes from. And the work is called Meant to be Bent, with a question mark in the end. So it's a question that I ask the viewer, is it meant to be bent? And the answer is no, of course, but here it is, it's bent.
What is the size of this work, Shivani?
This is almost 6.5 feet long.
Okay, I think in the next slide you have a display picture which gives a sense of how large this work is. It doesn't give an idea. I think this was what, 7 feet? 6 feet?
Yes, almost 6.5 feet.
6.5 feet,
yeah,
yes.
almost 6.5 feet.
It's a very large work, actually. I do remember that. And it's very interesting to see, how by playing with the form, and I think you're going to be showing a couple of images next where very common household objects and tools and how you've played with them. And there's a quirkiness also. I'll be waiting for that. Yes. Okay. So that's the, next one.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that we also have that pause between seeing the first image and mentally thinking of it in a certain scale because we know the object, and then seeing it at another scale. It's really played with our expectations, I think.
It's very familiar and yet it's not anymore. So that adds to the interest and the quirkiness. So Shivani, just go to the next one with the bag. I think
Sarah is moving it. Yeah, this one. So this work, I actually took the idea of dysfunctional and really explored it, extended it, and exaggerated it a bit, because I've sort of distorted these objects without really changing their scale. So you can see a wooden bag, which is actually a paper bag converted into wood. And there is a two-handled spoon and a two-headed safety pin. So I've actually played upon the form of these objects. And so I realized that actually by changing the material of a given tool, I actually deprive it from its function. So that is very sort of, so I actually extended the idea of the dysfunctional in this work here. And, it's all these objects that you see are pretty much what they are in their real life. So I haven't sort of changed the scale here. From here on, I have been, so this is a detail of the work, where you can see there's a two-headed safety pin and a hammer with thorns growing on them.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then, okay, so this work is called Empty Bags. And these are paper bags and cloth bags, which I've converted into wood. So again, as I say, by changing their material, I've deprived them of their function. You can't lift them, you can't take them anywhere. They are just very heavy bags. Also, this work comes from the idea of how we continue to fill ourselves, continue to want more and more material, and after fulfilling every desire, it would lead us to something else. So I often wonder that our bag never gets filled up. So it's a bag which remains empty. And so this work I wanted to place much below the eye level to actually for the viewers to see the void inside. So this is a detail of that bag, and it is a cloth bag which I had converted into wood. Yeah, so this work is the hangers, and it's a very recent work. I did that last year only, and it was part of a show called This and That with Studio Art Gallery in March 2021. So this work actually comes from the whole idea of how these hangers are pushed and pulled and stretched, so that they lose their shape and size, very much like what happened to us in the pandemic. Our state of being by what was going on. And this little thread that hangs from it kind of is a reminder of this pressure these hangers have gone through. Yeah, we can move on to the next image. Yes.
Yeah, that's the details. So yeah, that's nice to see. So the quirk adds to the elements of satire, and it offers new ways of looking and re-examining everyday objects and their function. That's interesting. And the bags, they are my favorite work, actually. I love the idea of the void, and it's a comment on also on the capitalistic culture, because we're just trying to fill it up with material and objects, and yet it remains we remain unfulfilled at the end of it.
Yes.
So that's
also the fact that we have made nature nature into a shopping bag. We are just exploiting it mindlessly. So I think that also kind of comes around here.
Right. So it's interesting to see how the thread has been explored in various ways, and you've done sewing and crocheting and stitching, and you've painted them, something that we mentioned earlier too. Can you talk a little bit more about that? So how have you been, exploring them in various ways, and what is the reasoning behind them? How do you talk about that then?
So I have over time worked with threads, and I realized that the size of the threads can matter a lot. So in my sculptures, I've used a thicker thread, a thicker, fuller thread, which is not, say, a yarn, which can be wound upon something, or can be left, or in all the ways that you've seen in the previous slides. And a thinner, more delicate thread could be sewed or crocheted, or even embroidered in some way or the other. So yes, so this is a work where I've used both painting and crochet, and I also like the intersections of these two mediums, where the crochet meets the painting, and it's very interesting when one ends, the other one begins. So you can see one or two details that I'm going to be showing. Yeah.
This is painting and the crochet, right?
Crochet, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So it's that's what I was saying, that there are these beautiful intersections between painting and crochet, which I have kind of worked on. Sarah, can we enlarge the image? Is there a possibility to enlarge it?
She could do that, but it just seems to be getting stuck for some reason.
Yeah,
Oh, it's moving now. Okay, great. That's lovely. Yes. You know, what I also find interesting, Shivani, in your works, that they're very deceptive in a sense that, you know, the aesthetics that you use as a device in all your works, it's very deceptive as it, you know, there's so much of silent conflict, there is so much of violence and all of that which is subverted in all of these works. And that is fascinating to watch.
So I kind of it's interesting that you're saying and using this word deceptive, because I actually mean something else and I say something else. I do that. I think knowingly. I enjoy that. I enjoy it because I want to know how the viewer takes it. You know, how the listener or the viewer of the works actually understands it. It's interesting if they really understand the finer nuances or the hidden meaning. So you're very, it's a very interesting observation, Nalini.
It's very layered, I feel, you know, and the narratives are just hidden, and you have to unravel the threads to get to what you're trying to project here. Also, what I find is interesting that you know what, when you mentioned that by varying the thickness of the thread or fiber, you're able to portray different concepts, in the sense that if it's so much thicker and you're talking about the strength, and when it is so delicate and fragile appearing, then there is a different narrative altogether. So that part is also fascinating for me.
Yes. So yes, this brings us to another work here. I've used the crochet, the painting, and I've kind of put. So the whole idea is to understand what I'm trying to say. So I use painting or crochet or photography as tools to actually express what I want to say. So here I'm actually talking about the social fiber, just kind of knitting itself onto my skin. You can see it in the next slide. Yes, so this work comes from.
Yeah, very interesting. It's a second skin.
Yeah, so I have kind of used threads in a variety of ways. As I say, I use it to express as in how, you know, whatever is required, whatever I want to say, I kind of appropriate through either painting or photography or crochet or, you know, just sewing. So I sort of do this with the thread. So it becomes both my tool of, tool as a language and also as a material.
Yeah.
So here I have actually collaged it. So part of it is collaged and part of it is sewn on the paper. And of course, part of it is, painted. Yes, so this is again a recent work done in 2020 during the lockdown. And so I've embroidered these objects that were in my house onto rice paper. So this rice paper is an extremely fragile paper, and I've layered it, and I've embroidered these objects with the thread. Also, I think during that time, our involvement had been totally onto food, being in the lockdown. So in terms of getting food in the house and preparing it and cooking and hoarding it, so our whole involvement had been with food during that time. So so being at home, I had this rice paper. I used this rice paper to create these works. We can move on to the next one. And of course, during that time, parallelly, there were a lot of things happening, in the city. There was this farmers' protest happening.
Can you move to the next one, please?
So yes, this is
Yeah.
though a set of 16 works that I've done, but I'm only showing one or two here.
So this was also during the farmers' protest that this work was created, and for me, I found it interesting to see the shift that you made, from the personal and the social perspectives that you had earlier to move towards reflecting power politics and acknowledging the much larger social ecosystem with respect to environment and
Yes.
urbanization and capitalism. So that's the shift that I tend to see in your work from this series actually.
So this shift hadn't happened kind of. I think it happened naturally. It wasn't a very conscious shift into this. I think it with what is going on, and how
Right.
one starts appropriating things. I think this kind of shift happened. I had my work has over time sort of become more like a social commentary than
Yeah.
coming from a very sort of personal space. It has taken taken to becoming almost like a social commentary. Yes.
Right. So because this was also created during the pandemic, and then
Yes.
what else were you doing at the time? Do you want to share that?
Yes. So during the pandemic, I wasn't able to go to my studio, so I was
Yeah.
left at home with my needle and threads and some paper, and also this beautiful copper thread that I was using at that time. I was actually creating a work for a show Nalini was supposed to curate, and which had large scale installations. And so I was actually voraciously crocheting this work.
Could you, yeah,
Yes.
move to the next image, please? Yeah. So yeah, Shivani, do you want to? Yeah. So this is the copper wire work actually,
Yeah. So
and like Shivani
yeah.
mentioned,
So this
yeah. Do you want to continue, Shivani? Please do.
no, I want you to continue here. Then I'll probably
Okay.
speak. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So this was a show actually we were planning to do in Bangalore, and everything was, set. We had a gallery space, beautiful, beautiful space actually. And I wanted these very large format sculptural installations. Shivani was one of the artists, and we had two other women artists for this. The whole concept was around the self and, how it emerges, and from a host of factors which are associated with culture, social politics, gender, and also individual psychological frameworks. So, this entire notion of self and identity, how they're fluid, and then they transform with time, events, and awareness. That was something which we were trying to explore. And this was way back in January, actually, when the
Yes.
pandemic had not even started. And then, as the lockdown happened and the pandemic just progressed, of course, the show did not take place, not as yet.
Yes. Yes.
But what happened was all of these issues and all of these factors that we were talking about, they started to come and they started to be reflected in the work. I think that was also very interesting, and we'd love to know where the work is being shown now, Shivani. If you
Yeah,
could
yeah.
share
So
that.
this is actually a work. This is an image of a work in progress. I had actually enlarged it. So I worked on it for nearly 6 months, and maybe a little more. And this is almost now 12 to 13 feet by 11 feet. So so it will be shown at Perth in Australia next month in a very interesting show with very amazing artists at Homesa Court Gallery. Yeah, so and it will be parallel to the craft triennale. So I'm actually looking forward to the show where this will be exhibited.
So
Yeah,
I'm also looking forward to that show, but yeah, let me say it was hard for me to let go of this work. I
yeah,
really
yeah,
wanted it to be a part of my exhibition, but anyways, more will happen.
yeah,
So, do you want to share the detail of it in the next one?
yeah, yeah. I think Sarah will have to move it to the next one. Yes.
That's the shadow play. It's wonderful actually. I just love. the idea of trap. I think, do you want to talk about how it is? Yeah.
Yeah, so when I began doing this work, I was doing it to actually I was doing this thinking of home and protection and safety. And then it began growing. And then at that time, this pandemic happened. And I was also thinking of how humans have actually created a trap for themselves. They have kind of woven a trap for themselves. And I was weaving at the same time, weaving this at the same time. So I kind of drew a parallel connection with this whole idea of doing something which ends up being a trap. So, weaving something which, the work is called Weaving Traps. So it sort of draws this conclusion that, we weave our own traps somewhere.
And also, it was interesting that because it was copper wire and we had discussed it, that was, yeah, do you want to just mention that?
Yeah, so it's copper wire, and see, copper is a surface which doesn't let the virus stay. So as I was saying, that I was creating this thinking of protection and safety and all of that, and turns out that it becomes a huge trap. And it's become so big that it's kind of can trap anyone.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So thank you, Shivani, for taking us through your process and giving us insights into your art practice.
Yes.
I think all of these artist talks are very important to give us a better understanding about the art and where they come from and how the works are located from a personal standpoint as well. So now I'm just going to request Parvati and Ravi to join us back and to take this forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Nalini and Shivani, for such a wonderful conversation. And I think, as Nalini said, it was very interesting that some of the dysfunctionality that you talk about crept into the technology. And I think that's what keeps these things interesting and alive and of the moment. So, really, thank you for sharing. I think that was a wonderful presentation, lovely work. And we've really, really enjoyed going through it. Lots of questions, lots of comments. And in no particular order, I'll try and go through sort of many of them, mostly addressed to Shivani, some to the panel, but let's sort of go through it. The first one is from Roberto Muffoletto. I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, but he wants to know what the relationship of your work is to gender and labor, and that the work is very beautiful, but does it take away from the conditions of labor? I guess it's sort of two questions in one. To Shivani and Nalini, feel free to sort of jump in and interpret your answer to this question.
So if I have to say, I'm not, see labor, when we talk about labor, this whole thing has begun coming now. I've begun getting conscious about labor and what is going on, our social situations now. So my language has slowly turned into this whole, expressing this whole idea of maybe exploitation or maybe violence. And
Nalini, do you want to sort of add to what you might see in the work?
Yeah, so I think there is a link to craftivism, in a sense, in Shivani's works. And that's where she's able to discuss the politics of class and the divide which exists in the country, because the craftspersons, they belong to a certain section of society, and by bringing them out into the open and acknowledging their efforts, it's a bridging which she's doing as well. So this is how I would respond to it.
Yes. There is a comment saying that the bending hammer was a very strong statement, which gave a great sense of closure, which I thought was a very interesting comment. From Lena Vincent, who says how fascinating it is to see the transformation of an object through scale, and how it's very much that sort of that sense of eeriness or that sense of disquiet that you get when you see the familiar in the unfamiliar scale. And I was sort of being polite when I said it was actually worked when we saw the hammer, in isolation, and then had this freak, and then we saw it again and it sort of changed completely. Shantamani, who was our speaker in the last session, wants to know, Shivani, what does the term dysfunction mean to you?
What does the term dysfunction mean to me? So, well, when I say dysfunctional, this dysfunctional comes from a lot of things that I see around myself. I sometimes see relationships, life, policies, rules are all dysfunctional. So that is why this whole idea of dysfunction, I began working on this whole idea of dysfunctional from there, and I began expressing it through the objects that I've been using, through the tools and instruments that I've been using. I made them, scaled them big, I distorted them, just to say that so many things around us are dysfunctional, and yet we continue to function through them, even if it's not working. We are still sort of going on. So yes, so that is the whole thing. That is where dysfunctional comes from. This is what dysfunctional means for me.
Another artist, Mukesh Sharma, wants to know a little bit more about how thread connects to your work and how it is a material inspiration.
So I did talk about where it comes from, and thread for me, it's so interesting that it can signify a bond, and when it gets entangled, it signifies a bondage. So in that sense, it says a lot of things. It can be maneuvered to express a lot of ideas. So yes, so I use thread in a variety of ways. I knit it, I tear it, I break it, I bind things in it. So yeah, in that sense, I explore it in a variety of ways. Yeah.
Anna Lynn Tom says there is an eminent translation from experience to work of art in your works, addressing you, Shivani.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you would be able to explain your work using the idea of citation or performity, and if so, how? But if those are not the binaries you would like to use, how else would you like to sort of speak about your work? She uses the two senses of citation and performity, but if yes, how? But if not, how else would you like to explain that whole idea of translation of experience to a work of art?
Translation of an experience to a work of art. Well, I do. It comes from the time spent with this experience. I think, when you spend a lot of time and you spend a lot of thought in an experience, towards an experience, I think you start to dig deeper and start to understand and unravel a lot about it and about yourself through it. So I think that is where that is how it is translated into a work of art. I think this experience is translated into a work of art. So yeah.
Then a question about the pandemic. I guess it's something that's sort of we're all still enmeshed in that, Shivani, to use an allegory. It's actually a question addressed to the whole panel, saying sort of, has the pandemic taught us any creative lessons, and what would you like to see that is different in the art world, if possible, post the pandemic?
Well, there is with the pandemic, I think we've become more sensitive to a lot of issues. I think to a lot of issues related to our systems, our structures, and also towards nature. I think we've become more sensitive, and we are very consciously thinking about them. So I see a lot of work happening there, I think, and it is required. I think we need to bring to light a lot of things that have been not talked about, or have just been kept beneath the surface. So in that sense, it has come out. And so yes, so the pandemic has helped us to look at questions that we were otherwise not really addressing. And yes.
So, I find this very interesting what Shivani has said, that many of these issues which we were taking it for granted, and we are forced to look at them. One of them for me is, of course, the human and nature relationship, but on the other hand, it is also self-care, I feel. The mental health, the mental health of ourselves, how we look after ourselves. This is an important area which we are forced to look into. And perhaps that is something which is going to appear more and addressed more in art, in the art world as well. So this is more esoteric perhaps, but then if you look at physical changes, then of course we have moved more online, and there's the digital world, and of course we're talking, and that's also, everything is virtually, the experiences that we're having are immersive, but then virtually. So those are some of the differences which are very obvious, I think, and which are taking place. Let's see how things change, and once we get back. So right now, I think it's also very difficult to imagine how the situation is going to be. We're looking at working in a similar manner as we have, though we're looking forward to being able to function in a physical world too. But the way I see it, it's going to be more of a hybrid model also. The online, the virtual space is not going to go away. It will probably be something which we learn to adapt and use better, and and move forward then.
Ravi, would you like to think about this?
Yeah. It's been really fascinating. I've been looking at all the key words that the speakers have been using. And what I like is, the thought of deception, in terms of material and what it conveys, when you look at objects versus the human scale, the politics versus the divide, and, and trying to create a bridge between craft and art, and so things like that, and the word unraveling, the works just unravel to offer new perspectives with the things we use every day, and the fragility of things, and then that gets converted just by use of a different material. And of course, the scale of the works, from a small, tiny safety pin to a 6-foot one blown and put up on the wall. And I mean, it makes us think about so many things. So that's talking about Shivani's work. And there was a very interesting thing about the red and white in her work, and whether red represents feminism and periods and all that. So it really, that was a very pertinent question, I thought. So there's so many things we get out of her work and practice. And in terms of the pandemic, of course, yes, we are all going through it, and we are all accepting, so many, everything is a norm now, wearing a mask, distancing, and, we have SOPs for everything. They were only in technical manuals before, and now, we seem to be getting used to that. And like Nalini said, we are more and more immersed in a virtual digital world, where everything is going online. And, so I think even art and artists are getting used to that. How to convert it commercially is another big question, which is a worrying thought for many artists. Because if there's no physicality of, things, it could be a problem. But the positive thing is that we are all getting more sensitive towards people around us, not only artists, but the man on the street. And, we're talking about migration and livelihoods, I mean, so it's a big debate. I think you can talk about this in a different, in a whole new show, actually. So thanks.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we are going to have more shows, Ravi, so we
Yes.
will call upon you to discuss that in it.
Sure.
But yes, I mean, speaking for myself, I think what, you do get a sense that artists are feeling ever more isolated in the pandemic, where anyway, the sense of community is a very fragile construct within the art world. And with something like the pandemic, when you completely sort of take away the physicality, it's become a very problematic space for artists to work in. And that is probably why, we've sort of even constructed something like Voices to sort of reach out and connect and to share journeys and to, in a sense, know that one isn't alone, that there are many people that are dealing with this time in the creative world in very different ways. And to sort of establish these, I again find myself using allegories from Shivani's work. And I think, in fact, even the very quote that I started with about conversations being filaments that link us together, it's something that, as Nalini says, I think will come to stay. And it's sort of, I think that's the positive part of the pandemic, that we're able to have this conversation between Shivani and Nalini and Ravi and me. I mean, just the four of us, we're in entirely different places. At least, Nalini and Ravi are in the same city, but the rest of us are in different places. And yet we're able to come together in a way to share with a pretty low carbon footprint, I have to say. But to carry on to a question to you, Shivani, I mean, the question is, do you welcome people into your studio and, have those kinds of conversations there? And if so, how has that been impacted in the pandemic? Do you miss it? Do you still do it? What is?
Of course, I love to have people in my studio because it's a very sort of sacred, special place, and it's wonderful to talk around work. And so this has been impacted because for the past almost 1.5 years, I probably just had one guest or something. So also this entire fear of having people over or inviting people into your space has been a little, one is not very comfortable with this second wave and so on. It's been a little difficult. So though, yes, of course, I miss that. I miss people coming in and just just to have a wonderful conversation. Yes.
And just, I think, there are questions coming in, but I'm going to sort of limit it to combining these two questions together in the end, where, both Fazila Hanif and Priyanka Aggarwal are still curious about your use of red, Shivani. I mean, does it relate to, feminism in any particular way? Does it, perhaps use other, I know you've talked about and all of that, but I think
I did mention blood, and I did mention the blood vessels. So many people, when they see my work, do draw this connection with maybe the menstrual blood. And I don't do it consciously, but if it is appearing to be, I can't, it's appearing to be that to someone. I cannot, though I did not do it consciously. I did not think of menstrual blood when I was making it. What I was thinking of was definitely pain through a wound, pain through blood, pain through the blood oozing out. So yes, that kind of reference has been there. I do think of that when I was doing it, but definitely I can't say otherwise. Yeah.
Thank you, Shivani. Good answer. Since we're running out of time, I'm going to ask Nalini first to give us her closing remarks, then Shivani.
Yeah.
And if there's anything else you want to add, Ravi, do something. Nalini.
Thank you, Parvati. I think it's been such a wonderful evening, and thanks to Ravi and #Collective. What you mentioned earlier about the sense of isolation that all of us have been going through. I think as creative people, we thrive on meeting each other, meeting and greeting each other at physical events, art previews and visiting artist studios. That's something which keeps us energized. And we've been really missing all of that in the last 1 year or so. So this kind of a program that you've started, I think it really allows us to connect And we've picked up the phone, Parvati, if you remember. We talked to each other for, I think, after almost a year or so. And it was mainly because of voices that we spoke to each other. So that was a trigger. So I'm very happy that it has allowed us to reconnect with each other. And I hope everybody will continue to do just that, because at the end of the day, I think we are all isolated in some way or the other. We need that connection with each other. Thank you.
Thank you. So I would also like to thank the audience for all their patience with the images not working and everything. I think everybody's been very patient with us, and I thank Ravi and Parvati and the Hashtag Collective for inviting me here to speak. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shivani, Nalini. Ravi, is there anything you would like to add?
I just want to say thanks to everyone. It's so nice that you could be here on a Friday evening, and thanks to the pandemic also. You're kind of tucked inside your homes, and anyway, so it's nice to see so many prominent people on the show tonight. I thank each and every one of you. So it gives us a lot of strength to carry on this this Voices program, and I promise you will have many more interesting conversations. So the very next episode, that is next month, will be a Chennai-based group, which Parvati will talk about in her closing remarks. Thanks.
No, thank you, Ravi. I mean, we don't want to give too much away, and we discovered that it's a movable feast in the time of the pandemic, that there are many things that we plan to do which because of certain restrictions and certain unforeseen events, we're not able to host everybody we would like to, but we're still keeping crossed fingers and toes and thumbs and hoping that we would be able to showcase many of the artists we would like to. So thank you, Shivani and Nalini, for participating in Voices. Really, it was a very, very generous sharing of artworks and ideas. So from all of us at Voices, Ravi, Namrata, Sarah, Abin, Biju, and myself, we thank you, and we thank you, the audience. We see so many familiar faces there, and I would love to single you out, but then that would be just a litany of names. You know who you are, and thank you so much for being here and supporting us. We do appreciate the time you've given to Voices and to this evening of art conversations. So episode 3 of Voices is at the same time on September 3rd. It promises to be a very interesting session with Chennai artists Sunil, Shri, and Anish, representing the art collective Kinetics, and they will be in conversation with arts writer Dr. Ashrafi Bhagat. We're really looking forward to that, and we're really looking forward to archiving all these arts conversations, and who knows what will come of all of it. So do tune in then. Thank you for being there this evening. Until then, keep safe, and keep the conversation going. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.